Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Soul Podcasting Podcast, where passion, purpose, and podcast strategy come together to help you amplify your voice without the burnout. I'm Demetria Zinga, founder of Soul Podcasting Collective, where we help mission-driven creators and thought leaders like you launch and grow podcasts that make real impact, not just noise. And I hope you were able to catch our very first interview on this show with Angela Ross on our last episode. She inspired us to keep going as podcasters, to stay in our lanes, and to shine in our industries. So go back and listen to episode 42 when you get a moment. Now, today's episode, it's one that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. We're going to be digging into what really makes a legacy podcast. Not just a popular podcast, not just a trending show, but one that builds brand equity, shapes hearts, and stands the test of time. And spoiler alert, you don't need millions of downloads to get there. So before we get into it, we introduced a new segment recently called Podcasting in the News. And so in our next segment, we're going to share some things that have been going on in podcasting recently. So according to Edison Research's 2024 Infinite Dial report, podcasting keeps growing across the board. But the thing that stood out for me were these particular statistics I'm about to share with you. 49% of monthly podcast listeners in the US are women, and that's an almost even split with men. Also, monthly listening among women has increased steadily over the past 5 years, showing that this medium is not just male-dominated anymore, it's starting to level out. And perhaps even the most interesting one for me was that women aged 35 to 54 are now among the most consistent podcast consumers. So what do these stats mean for you? Well, whether you're creating content for a diverse audience or you're building a brand that centers soulful conversations, these numbers show that there's a powerful shift happening right now. Women are not only tuning in, they're showing up, engaging deeply, and shaping the space with their presence. And even though my work has always championed women's voices, this movement impacts us all. It signals a bigger trend, and people are now craving more authentic, resonant storytelling. And if you're a creator driven by purpose, you're exactly where you need to be. So today's main topic that we're going to get into now is legacy podcasting. What is it? How do we establish a legacy podcast? So I say this often that a legacy podcast isn't defined by downloads. I believe it's defined by depth. And what I mean by that is that it's not about going viral necessarily. It's okay if you do. It's great if you do virality, but it's about being valuable. So valuable that people come back to your episodes again and again and again. They're saving them. They're sharing your episodes, quoting them. Your content lives on because it means something. So let's break this down just a bit. Legacy podcasts are built on a few core pillars, and these are the things that make your show sticky, soulful, and long-lasting. And the first thing is consistency, and of course, with soul. This isn't about showing up every single week just because some marketing expert told you to. As marketers, we like to talk about consistency because it is the thing that we believe keeps us going and keeps our content flowing. And when we break that consistency, it breaks momentum, and then things start to shift just a little bit. But if you've listened to any of my prior episodes, you might realize that I kind of go against the flow with that I believe that consistency should be in alignment with your goals and with your lifestyle. And so that could be once a week, once every other week, once a month, once every 2 months. It depends on how often you're able to contribute value and bring that to the table for your audience. So if you're able to be consistent once every 3 weeks, then that's your consistency frequency, and that's okay. So that's my perspective of consistency. But just remember that you're not recording for the algorithm. Your voice carries something much bigger than that, and you're not here for the hustle, you're here for the mission. So even if you publish on a bi-weekly or monthly basis, your audience trusts that when you do show up, it's going to matter. So that's my first tip for you. My second is intentional storytelling. This is a big one because you're not just reading a list of tips into the mic. You're drawing people into an experience, and maybe you share a moment from your own life or you walk them through a challenge that you faced. The goal isn't to perform, it's actually to connect to the audience that's listening to you. So people remember stories, right? They connect with your humanity, your honesty, even your cadence, your rhythm, how you speak. That's where the transformation happens. An example for me is that I tell a lot about my story as a homeschool mom or a former homeschool mama. And I tell that story on all three of my podcasts because it's part of my life story. And so I weave in how I became an entrepreneur before I had my babies. And then as I started having children and homeschooling them and moving around the US to different states and reestablishing our family in different areas, learning the ropes of being in a new town or a new state and having to figure out my home education flow and what I was going to do to teach them at home while also building a business. That is a story on its own, right? And during this time, I also was podcasting. And so this is part of my story of podcasting soulfully, bringing my audience along with me as I talked about homeschooling on my homeschool podcast and sharing my life with them over the past decade. And I just have great memories of feedback that I've received over the years of people who said, hey, when you shared about your struggle with teaching math to your third grader, that resonated with me. Or I remember when you talked about homeschool organization, or when you talked about what it felt like to move and to find a new homeschool community, or how you were a blogger and a podcaster and how you became this kind of work at home mom while you were also managing your children's education. And it was because of the stories that I told. And I told about my life. I shared my life, and I was pretty transparent on my podcast. And sometimes I wondered if I was too transparent, but I figured that was the best way I could connect with an audience. Even if I would never meet any of the people who were listening, it meant a lot to me to be able to connect to them and to receive the feedback that what I was sharing was helpful. My third tip for you is depth over hype. And this one might ruffle a few feathers, but here it is. You don't need trending guests or flashy headlines to make an impact. You don't need to chase what's hot. You need to say something real. Again, going back to intentional storytelling, sharing your story, being transparent. It's that kind of depth that means you're not afraid to slow down. You're not afraid to challenge assumptions, to ask better questions of your guests. And when you do, your people, your listeners, they feel that and they stick around. So why are downloads not the end goal? Well, we're going to bust a myth really quick. More downloads does not mean more impact. I know there are people that are just wanting to make sure that they can hit that double amount of downloads per month. And they are gung-ho about making sure their podcast growth is showing in those numbers 1 year from now. And I get that can be an important part of your evaluation of your show. If metrics is important to you, that's okay. But although we all like seeing our numbers grow, it's because it's encouraging. If you're measuring your podcast's worth purely by stats, you're always going to feel like you're falling short. Because here's the thing, you don't need 100,000 downloads to book speaking engagements. True story. I've been invited to speak just from people listening to my podcast. And these are huge audiences. Now, I didn't always say yes to the invitations, but I have been invited and I have had the opportunity to take center stage in front of thousands of people, whether in the homeschooling niche or in a podcasting niche. These are things that I have been invited to do because of my podcast, not because I have 100,000 downloads. Also, you don't need 100,000 downloads to build trust with your future clients. Remember, some of the people that you might coach or that you might work with will find you through an episode. I've had a lot of clients that have come to me through my podcast episodes. So that makes a big difference. Also, you don't need a huge amount of downloads to be recognized as a thought leader in your space, or to land media features or collabs, or to change someone's life even. right? Again, credibility doesn't come from the number of plays. It comes from the consistency and the clarity of your message. And by changing a life, that's the biggest thing you can do. You never know who's listening to you and how your words might be exactly what they needed to hear that day. So I'm going to say this just a little bit louder for the people in the back. Transformation doesn't require going viral, but what it does require is alignment with your mission, with your message, and with the people that you're here to serve. So I'm going to share a bit about how this has played out in my own podcasting life. When I first started soul podcasting, I didn't come in with a fancy strategy or have a huge launch plan. I started soul podcasting at the end of 2022. And honestly, I just knew that I needed a space to speak to creatives, entrepreneurs, and visionaries who were tired of trying to keep up with content trends and just wanted to share from the heart and with purpose. So I wasn't exactly focused on the charts. I was focused on alignment. I've had seasons where I've taken a break, where I've pivoted, I've rebranded, but the common theme is that I want to create meaningful conversations that help people step more fully into their voice and their vision. And guess what? That focus has led me to coaching clients, to brand partnerships, to guest features, and most importantly, relationships. This show isn't the biggest, for sure, but it's real. And it's building something that I'm proud of, and that is legacy. And last of all, let's bring it home. Because you might be wondering, am I already on the path to building a legacy podcast? And in case you're wondering that, here are a few signs that you are. You get these heartfelt messages from listeners about specific episodes. Not just great show, but something personal like a DM or an email that says, hey, that episode really helped me. Or your audience starts quoting you back to you. You know, those phrases that you casually say every episode, they stick. And people start repeating them in conversation or on social. For example, on my Her Business Elevated podcast, I often have this tagline where I say, turning your profitable passion into a plan of action. And I have had listeners come back to me on a coaching call or a meeting that we have together, and they'll quote it back to me. They'll be like, hey, Demetria, I'm just turning my profitable passion into a plan of action. Let's get busy. Let's do this. And it just like really lights me up and just, makes me laugh a little, because having someone quote your own quote back to you is kind of fun. Okay. And so another thing is people recommend your show to other people. That kind of organic word of mouth growth, that's a huge sign of impact. It means that your podcast is memorable and meaningful, and your content is evergreen. Even your older episodes still get traction. And when you listen back, they still feel relevant and fresh. These are the episodes that, for me personally, are ones that I did maybe 12 years ago and are still out there for homeschool parents to listen to. And I still get downloads on these episodes every single day. And every once in a while, I'll get an email or somebody will reach out and say, hey, that episode, that was fire. I needed that. And so evergreen content that still gets traction is one way that you know that you are already building a legacy podcast. Also, you feel a deep sense of purpose when you record. You're not forcing it. You're not faking it. You know this work matters to you and to those who are listening. And if any of that feels familiar, you're not just building a podcast, you're building legacy. So keep going. All right, friends, here's what I want you to take from today. You don't need 1 million downloads to create 1 million ripples. You don't need to be everywhere. You just need to be aligned and consistent. Your message, your voice is already shaping your legacy, one listener at a time. And if you're thinking, okay, I'm ready to get even more intentional with my show now. Okay, I've got a free resource to help you out. It's called the Is It Time to Build Your Podcast Dream Team checklist. And it's going to help you figure out if you're ready to delegate, grow, and build the right support around your vision. You can grab it in the show notes. Also, if you haven't begun your podcast yet, I'd love for you to check out the Launch Confidently Podcasting Checklist. That resource is there to help guide you through the essential steps from choosing the right gear to planning your content and setting up for maximum visibility. You're going to say goodbye to overwhelm and hello to a podcast that connects, builds your brand and grows your influence. So I'd love for you to check that out if you haven't started your podcast yet. Also, if you've been podcasting for at least a year and you've got a story to share about your journey, I'd love to feature you on an upcoming episode. There's a link in the show notes to apply to be a guest on the show. Don't be shy. I'd love to hear from you. All right, that's it for today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Keep showing up, keep sharing your voice, and as always, keep podcasting with soul.